Startup life is known to have its ups and downs. A well-timed idea can mean business gold, but it's rare that the path to success is really on the straight and narrow and clear the whole way. While you're building the right processes, the right messages, the right features, you're getting the right team, you have the right products, but really almost every single founder is going to hit that point where they say, is this working? Is this right? Is this thing on? Welcome to Managed Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Katrina Purcell.
And I'm Rachel Anderson.
And today we're breaking down how to tell whether it's time to pivot, or if you just need to double down and push through. All I could think about when I was reading this one is the episode of Friends where Ross is like, pivot, pivot, and then the couch is gonna, oh my God. Anyway.
I love that episode
let's
so much.
bring it back to business, Rachel.
No, you know what? You know what's so funny is that entire series was out, done, all the things before I even made my business name, Pivot Strategies at the time, and now it's Pivot Studios. But I have always gotten people that comment that same thing, and it never gets old. I love it so much, and I think it's because I am obsessed with pivoting. It is so just critical in business. In fact, I was just talking to a business founder this morning, and we were talking about how their main product, their main service offering is fine, but all of a sudden there's this whole new world that's not honestly related, that they've been getting contracted work for, that customers have been coming to them for, that's like building its own traction. And we had an entire conversation about if they should pivot their entire business based on this entirely new idea, this new opportunity that really is coming up for them. And the question became, is now the moment? Do we do it? Do we go all in? Do I stay the course? Do I ? Right? And so this is I literally laughed and I was like, we're recording a podcast about this later today. It was such incredible timing.
So what do we, like, when we think about pivot or persevering, like, what do we really mean when we use those terms?
Yeah, I think it's great to just sort of start at the beginning. So when I think about pivoting, in fact, when I talk to leaders about pivoting, I think they think of these really big things, like everything has to change, or if something's not quite right, we, have to do a huge overhaul. And really, when something feels amiss, or you're trying to figure out these right products, times, messaging, teams, it's not usually that big. It's just a little, or relatively little pivot. So really we're talking about anything that could be targeting maybe a new audience, or maybe you're changing your pricing model so that it is adjusted slightly for whatever you're now doing, or whatever the feedback is. It's really about being deliberate in changing direction and not panic changing, which I think is a lot of times what leaders tend to want to do. And then on the other end, when we really talk about persevering or staying the course, it's really also about a strategic decision to optimize, or to focus in, or to really, I'm going to say hone, even though I think even that could be described a little bit, but hone towards an idea, a tactic, a sales maneuver, or a part of your business to really make sure that you continue forward. And it's really hard to make that kind of decision sometimes, especially when you feel the pressure of success, as so many leaders do. It's all on me. These people's jobs, their lives depend on this decision. The company's success depends on this decision. And sometimes that can really cloud judgment. So a good example is if you're just not hitting your revenue targets. That might be a moment where you think, oh my gosh, I should just overhaul everything. Nothing's working. Mm-hmm. Or you could say, I really know that this could work. We just need to identify where in that thing we're off a little bit and adjust that, right? Do we change the product, or do we change our tactics? Do we find a new market? Do we stay the course? So those are the kind of moments in the business when you're not thinking about all or nothing that you might have to make that decision between pivot or preserve. Or persevere. Technically, maybe either.
Could be both, right?
Yeah, it could be both.
So when you think of pivots, are you thinking like, I'm trying to think. Okay, my ideal customer used to be B2C and now I'm going B2B. Like to you, is that a pivot or is that something more whole scale?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually think that most of the time, if you're asking questions like, is my business B2B or B2C, then you're probably making an entire business shift. That is not a pivot. That is a huge decision to make. I think better signs to look for to understand if you're making pivot questions versus big business questions are things like our customers are confused or disengaged or not converting right. So what are the things that we are doing that confuses them, or that we are doing that loses them in the process, or we are doing that's not getting them over the hurdle to actually closing the deal? I definitely am emphasizing the we, because these are not customer problems. These are like us and our businesses problems. I think another sign could be something about the vision that you have for solving problems for other businesses. So you're solving a problem maybe that no one else is really trying to fix. So maybe that's like a market misalignment, meaning you aren't hitting the right kind of market. You should be in finance instead of tech, or you should be looking at CFOs instead of HR people, right? Like, are we hitting the right person who actually has the problem? One example that I talk a lot about in marketing, because I think it's underrepresented, is when we think about the buyer versus the user, who are really different sometimes. Like one has purchase power, but one has the problem you're solving. Right. So that's another great example of like, is that just a pivot we need to make in how we talk or approach? I think from a business model perspective, if we widen the scope of what it looks to pivot, we could also ask things like, are we bleeding resources without really a clear path to what profitability looks like? And that is maybe a bigger pivot, but the answer itself might be a small pivot. So even though the question is big, the answer doesn't have to also be big and dramatic. So ways or times where you personally as a leader might be able to use your intuition to really understand these moments is if you're feeling maybe unmotivated or misaligned with what's happening, whether that's with a customer or your team, or maybe you feel disconnected from your original vision for how what you do or what you provide aligns to solving an actual problem, then those are all great indicators that you could potentially be ready for a pivot. A great example, if I can just throw out a couple examples of companies that have done this, are Instagram and YouTube in our modern day. Instagram originally started as a location-based check-in platform. And it was just sort of like, hey, I'm here. I don't know if you remember when that was like all the rage back in
I don't
like,
know if I joined it at that point. I mean, to me, it was always photos, right? It was always more visual.
And that's what they pivoted to, was like, oh, people don't want to just check in. They want to see what they're checking in at. And so that's where the pivot was. And similarly, YouTube, this one's, I think, funnier, but YouTube started as a dating app. And it started as a way to like, I don't know, find people that wanted to like date each other. And now it's multi-million dollars worth of revenue for video engagement in general, right? So these kinds of pivots, when you really take stock of what's happening, can be really successful and very smart.
Okay, do you have any dramatic examples for Persevere? Because I feel like that YouTube one is going to send me down a rabbit hole.
Yes. Okay, so I think that I'm gonna do this in reverse. I'm gonna give you a couple examples, and then I'm gonna explain what you can kind of look for as a business to persevere. So I think some good examples of persevere for businesses can be both positive and negative. So a positive one, in my opinion here, would be Apple. Apple for a really long time was like kind of fine, right? But Dell was the main player, and they were trying to get into the market. They were trying to figure out how to really be something that people wanted. I think a couple times Steve Jobs came and went because even he as a founder wasn't necessarily revered at the company. And finally, they found their perfect user base, which was college students. And they got
they started those
in.
ads.
That's
Remember
right.
the ads?
Yes, yes. And they got the foothold on college campus. And from there, we now have all these other things, right? Yeah, we hear the stories about, the iPad, or not the iPad, the iPod, which really was another kind of cementing in the Apple legacy, the like ingenuity of it, the moment of it, all the things. But really, when you think about the origins of Apple, they really struggled for a while. So that small pivot of figuring out where your key market was that you're solving problems for was super critical. But the dark side of the persevering is things like Blockbuster or BlackBerry.
Oh,
I mean,
R.I.P.
BlackBerry. I know, right? Like, I wish Blockbuster was back. Seriously, the other day I was like, I need a movie.
No one
like,
needs a BlackBerry, but Blockbuster.
Right. Well, yeah. And so, like, BlackBerry is a good example because they decided nobody was going to use the internet on the phone. That didn't need to be developed. So they stayed the course. They were like, do what we do right now really well. And they got usurped by, Apple and other devices that had internet on the phone. And now BlackBerry, I think, actually still exists, but they're a totally different company, totally different purpose. And we all know the story of Blockbuster. So when you think about, persevering as a leader, you still are going to want to check off sort of these things. Like, the problem that you want to solve still deeply matters, and there's a person that still really needs it, or a market. Mm-hmm. But you're just maybe early to it. So it's going to take longer, or you're under-resourced, so it's going to take, a little bit more effort to really make that connection. Or maybe you're seeing signs of traction. They're just not very consistent yet. Those would be great signs to not pivot. Just keep going down the same track. This one, I'm going to put a huge underline, bold, italics, all the things, but you haven't executed on your current strategy. So often leaders forget that strategy is effective in a long-term view. Mm-hmm. And day to day, even sometimes month to month, that long-term strategy feels like it's not working, and that's not necessarily the case. And my best analogy is always the stock market. Now, right now, it's a little scary, so ignore that. But even it'll be true of that. If you look at it over 10 years, it's always going up. It's maybe very slow, but it's up, up, up. But in that 10 years, you're going to see huge dips of down. That doesn't mean overall you're not still getting to the right place, but you have to zoom out. Otherwise, you feel like it's not working. And so all of these things are really good signs for you to continue forward and persevere with what you're currently doing.
Which is, we've talked about on a couple of episodes around KPIs, right? So understanding those street signs, right? That as you're executing your strategy, whether or not you feel like you're getting to the destination that you set up for. So, are you headed to Florida, or have you pivoted and you're going to Texas instead? And so that's why the data is important there. But
I've legitimately done that before. This was before GPS, but I'm notoriously terrible with geography and directions. And I went 45 minutes the opposite direction down the freeway, and before I realized that I was nowhere near where I needed to be and had to U-turn.
And that would be a pivot for sure.
And that would be more than a pivot. That was a U-turn.
So when leaders are thinking about this, right, how do they assess which one is the right choice? And who do they need to talk to, right? Who do they need to bring in, or who do they need to get guidance from to really decide which one is the right choice to make?
There are so many different ways you could kind of tackle this. And I do think that it's both data and people, right? I hate to say it because I want everything to be really clear, but sometimes it's a little bit of gut and a little bit of facts. And you need those things to both be gut, meaning your intuition and also other people's experience, right? Not just it feels right in my soul, but just the intangibles along with the numbers. Yeah. So I would kind of use this as a framework, and I'm just going to throw out 5 general things that if you use this sort of as a checklist, then you're probably going to make a good decision for where you're at in this exact moment. So the first thing I would do is exactly what you and I just talked about, which is data. What does your usage look like? What is the churn, which, is customers coming and going? What is your revenue? What is the feedback that you're getting from customers telling you? So some of that is quantitative and some of it is qualitative. And so you want to make sure that you're really looking at both to have a full data check, along with the KPIs and metrics if you have those, which You should, and if you don't, you should go back and listen to our episode about KPIs and metrics so you have them. But that's sort of your data check. And then, like I just referenced, you really want to make sure that you have your founder gut check or your executive team gut check. Do you still believe in the actual vision and problem that you're solving for people? Because it's really great to know that there is a problem and you're trying to provide a solution, but unless you still deeply believe that the world needs it, it's going to feel like you're slightly off all the time. And so you need to make sure that everyone is still aligned to the vision. And if not, it doesn't mean don't do it or it's wrong. Just explore that and be curious. What's going on? Is it a me thing? Maybe I need to change my position in the company, which is a hard thing, I think, to feel sometimes. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's just a conversation to remind everybody that this is like a real human you're helping, or this is a real problem you're solving for the world. The third thing I would say is market validation. So your customers, people in the world, still actively looking for what you have to offer. So it's not just about you being aligned to the vision, but is somebody actually going to give you money for this? The next thing is doing like an execution audit of sorts. So this is where that strategy piece really comes back in. You want to ask, have we truly, deeply, long-term, honestly, given this current strategy a full go? Is there any parts of it that we've left out? Is there anything that like we're mostly 75% there, but because that one middle piece is missing, everything falls apart and we just think the whole thing is, not working when really we just haven't been doing this one thing. And I think that this is a great area, just as kind of a side note, to bring in outside people with expertise over different areas, whether that's sales or your product, and kind of giving you a quick assessment of like, is everything working? And then finally, I think that this is probably one of the most valuable things is don't do it by yourself. You can feel a lot of conflicting things as leaders, as founders, when your company is small and you're really trying to gain momentum, or maybe you have a big, mash of chaos that comes up. So ask your team for input. What do they think? What about your advisors? What about your board members? What about other trusted people that you've brought in to consult or assist or help you push through what it means to be in this startup world? So you can create tools to do this. You could take a literal checklist. You could, go through the different things. But these are kind of the areas that I would really recommend to assess if you are going to pivot or if you're going to persevere.
So it sounds like if the market's moved, your product might not be resonating, a small or smart pivot could definitely fuel your startup, right? But if you're simply just in the messy middle, right, seeing sparks of progress, you might just need to persevere, right? Double down. Yeah. Chaos is always going to exist in your business, whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, right? So lean into their strategy and trust that checklist. Thank you so much for joining us in today's episode of Managed Chaos Podcast. You can follow and subscribe on YouTube, which is not a dating app any longer, and help us reach our goal of 5,000 followers this year. You can also follow or subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and we will talk to you on the next episode of Managed Chaos Podcast.